Good day, students. Welcome to our next lesson. Today, we will be focusing on organizational communication. So here is an outline of what this week's lesson will cover. I will be going through each one of these in some detail as we go through the lesson. So each one of these will be covered in some detail. So the first thing we want to look at is the nature of organizational communication. So even as environmental managers for which you are preparing yourselves, you must understand not just communication in general, but organizational communication, because this is often the type of environment that you will find yourself in. So it's important for you to be prepared and equipped for understanding how you must operate, because we have already learned about the importance of communication with regards to the environment. So organizational communication is a process through which people construct, manage, and interpret behaviors and symbols. So all of that is information. You're constructing an information strategy. How are you going to manage it, and how do you interpret the information that comes to you? And information can come to you in different forms. So there's a verbal, there's a non-verbal, and this information can be both intentional information, or it may be unintentional. People's behavior may be unintentional, and all of this can happen through interaction. That interaction may be direct, for example, between two people. It may be it may be mediated between different parties, and all of this can happen within an organization and even across organizations. So that's a definition of organizational communication. So there are varying levels of organizational communication. There is interpersonal, that's person to person, small groups or teams. For example, you may have department meetings. There would be larger meetings such as organizational meetings, annual general meetings in organizations or other associations. And there's also, as I mentioned before, there can be meetings across departments, from one department to another, within a department, across entire organizations, and even across sectors and across national borders. So even though we have these varying levels of communication, it all happens within an organizational context. So the principles apply across the board. So communication may highlight specific content. For example, you may have some specific information that may be covered in an organizational memo. Or communication may also highlight the nature of a relationship. For example, what do we mean by that? The person providing the information in the memo might be an expert, let's say a technical expert, or in a newspaper article. So they may be a technical expert providing information, important and critical information for the reader. And that information may actually be information that is critical for the reader to pay attention to, because they need to follow instructions based on that expert information. So typical areas of focus in organizational communication will be on tasks. So managers will have specific tasks identified for employees to follow. There may be social aspects of it. How do different groups of persons or different individuals, what type of behavior would be acceptable, not acceptable? Some of these would be issues that might be covered by HR, for example. It may also focus on administrative or functional operations, what needs to be done, how it needs to be done. And of course, another area of focus would be the dissemination or giving out of information, as well as receiving information. So in organizational settings, we often need to get feedback from various parties within the organization. So it must be two-way communication. It cannot be just simply directive giving out information from top down and no feedback being received. So let us look briefly at the role of organizational communication in the in environmental management. So clearly explaining your environmental management system, your EMS, to your employees is critical. So I want you to think of environmental management system not only in the traditional sense that we talk about in terms of our natural environment, but consider that your organization is an environment as well. So your organization has an internal environment, and then there is also the external environment outside of your organization. All right. So it is important for you to explain how your management system in your organization, how it works. All right. Your employees need to be aware of that. A more informed staff will be more committed to making your and it makes your organizational operations easier and more efficient. So if your staff within an organization, if they are well informed in terms of critical information that they need to have that can affect the way in which they carry out their duties. The more informed they are, is the better they will carry out their functions and the more efficiently the job will be done. Where there are gaps in communication strategy, you always find that the result of that will be chaos and confusion, and it reduces efficiency and levels of productivity. So all staff should be kept up to date. However, some employees need more environmental information than others, environmental in a broad context, remember. So what do we mean by this? Example, this depends on the area in which they work. In other words, what information is necessary for them to have and how much responsibility do they have. For example, you find the OSH departments in an organization, they will need more environmental, both internal and external information than someone in the finance department. So it all depends on what information they need to have. All right. Staff should also have enough knowledge on the issues that are facing them and how this can affect their work. For example, what is the level of indoor air quality? And how can that, if you have poor indoor air quality, this is clearly going to affect your actual productivity, because if you on site in an unhealthy environment, it can, for long term, it can affect your long-term health. Health will often reflect your level of productivity. If you have to be taking numbers of days sick often, if you have to, even if you're on the job for the X number of required hours, you may find your focus and your ability to actually complete your tasks, it will take longer, so it affects productivity. Additionally, how does the natural environment affect your ability to complete your tasks? If you have regional flooding in the area, this may affect staff ability to attend work. However, please also note we have some different circumstances happening now during this time of the COVID pandemic, where some people are working remotely as well. So there may be different circumstances. How does a person's home environment affect their ability for productivity? For example, some parents have to be working from home and looking after little children, they're homeschooling, and they have other issues that they are dealing with. So this can also affect productivity. So it is important, therefore, for organizations to communicate, effectively communicate the right type of information to the various categories of employees so that they have the information that they need in order to carry out their functions. Right, so organizational communication in a changing environment. So we know no environment is static. Things are always changing. The world we live in is always changing. So employees often become insecure as a result of changes that may occur within the organization or even outside the organization. Say, for example, if you have a manager that has changed, oftentimes a change in management will come with changes in the way things are done. When these changes come and employees now have to deal with these disruptions to what they are accustomed to, it can cause them to be very unsettled. So communication is critical. So in order to survive during times of environmental change, organizations, they are also compelled to make changes. So it may be necessary not only to communicate additional information, maybe training may need to be done. If things are being done in a different way, the employees may require some training, right? So for successful change to occur, you must have the cooperation of those most affected by it and ensure that they understand the purpose of the change. So if you find that they don't understand the purpose of the change, there may be some resistance, and all various types of perceptions and different levels of resistance can occur. All right, so communication is critical. So let's look now at 7 best practices of effective change management communication. So remember, we're talking about in an environment, internal or external, that changes are occurring and what needs to be done. So number 1, be specific early and often. You don't want to leave things hanging, leave it up to persons to make their own interpretation and assumptions about what is happening and why it's happening. So you want those who are affected and those who will be responsible for the changes and what are the changes, all must be addressed. So communicate effectively, early and often. Very important, remember that. So early and often. To whom, who is affected, who is responsible for the change, and what are the changes. You would also want to see not only what are the changes, but why are the changes being brought. So you want to number 2, you want to communicate through the right people. So the person making the change would usually be direct supervisors. So they may not have been the one that initiated the change, but they would be executing the change, your direct supervisors. So the desire for change must trickle down to each level in the organization in order to reach the persons most affected by it. All right. So when managers and supervisors, when they have a clear understanding of the nature and the purpose of the change, they are now in a better position to properly communicate this to the staff. So if you want to have effective, effective implementation of these changes, there must be proper communication at all levels so that that effective communication will trickle down to where it needs to go. Number 3, communicate through multiple channels. So each channel has strengths and weaknesses. So these channels will be different types and methods of communication. So each has strengths and weaknesses, and each can reach different groups of persons. So some examples would be in-person meetings. You may have a department meeting, an organizational meeting. There may be presentations, email, newsletters, videos, etc. Now, some of these examples of channels are channels that really provide one-way information, such as emails, newsletters, videos, etc. In-person meetings and maybe even presentations may provide the opportunity for question and answer, which would allow for somewhat more effective communication if questions and concerns can be addressed. Number 4, answer the question, what is in it for me and what does it mean for me? Because this will be important to the persons who will actually be carrying out the change, right? Your employees. So you want to appeal to employees' concerns. You want to ensure that you address their concerns. So you want to design communication according to the staff level of involvement. And you want to ensure that you communicate to them how the change will impact them. So some examples of concerns they may have. Is this change going to increase my workload? Is this change going to make my job easier and more efficient? So these are concerns you would want to clearly address to them if you expect to have cooperation. Number 5, prepare for resistance. So based on Kubler-Ross change curve, people affected by change experience emotional reactions to change. And those emotional reactions will be even more extreme when you see there's an absence of critical information, where people don't have information, they draw their own conclusions, they may imagine things, and as a result, they will react oftentimes aggressively and in resistance to what change is coming. So your communication strategy should be prepared with empathy. Show the employees that you have a plan. Let them know that you have training planned for them so that they're not going to be just dropped in the middle of the deep blue sea and not know what they have to do, which adds to their stress when they think, when employees think, or when anyone thinks that they're being placed in a situation where they're expected to carry out certain functions and tasks that they are not prepared for. This causes them to feel overwhelmed, and of course, they will react emotionally and put up resistance. That is just normal. Number 6, listen for feedback. Communication flows both ways. You cannot have effective communication just going one direction from supervisor or from manager to employees. If you don't talk to your team, productivity and morale suffers. You cannot expect to have efficiency and effectiveness in your organizational function if you do not have opportunities for feedback. So opportunities for feedback may involve having regular small group meetings, maybe departmental meetings or unit meetings, depending on the size of your organization. You can have online forums, chat forums, where there can be question and answer. You can, as an employer, you can send out employee surveys to get feedback on specific issues. And of course, your feedback you must take the feedback into consideration. You cannot just have feedback and get information and then you leave it sitting there and do nothing with it. Number 7, do not be afraid to repeat yourself. Repetition is an essential part of the change management communication. Repetition is important for us to internalize the changes and not have to be every minute having to be referring to documents so that you know what to do. And repetition will also assist the hearers in remembering that policies and ways of doing things have actually been changed, so that you're not inclined to automatically and instinctively go back to the old way of doing things. So employees need to hear about the change many times in order to fully understand and support it. All right, so repetition is actually a learning strategy. So even for the process of learning, in this case, they need to learn and remember that there has been a change in the way things are being done. So they have to hear it many times. So let's talk now about types of organizational communication. Here we have a schematic diagram that nicely organizes organizational communication into various categories for us. We are going to look at each one briefly in turn. So just note that we have 3 categories of information, communication, sorry. We have organizational communication based on our organizational structure. communication based on expression, and communication based on direction of the communication. And that is how we will look at it in today's lesson. So we first look at communication based on the organizational structure. So formal communications. So we have formal communication, informal and nonverbal. Our formal communications, this is information sent through official channels, such as by a senior officer within the organization, who would often provide instructions, decisions, and orders within their as the content in their communication. All right, so those are formal communications, and typically the intent is to provide instructions, information on decisions that have been made, etc. Informal communications now is different. This is also known as the grapevine communications. Within an organization, non-formal communication may take the form of, let's say, body language, for example, gestures, nods, smiles, whispers, or even gossip, for example, informal communication. And so top management, note, has no control over this form of communication. All right, so this is informal communication that's taking place on the ground. Then you have nonverbal communication. So this is communication without words, expression, facial expressions, vocal tones, gestures, etc. All right, so these are our examples of communication types that we can find within an organization. Now, communication types, organizational communication types, that is now based on direction of the communication. We have downward communication, upward communication, and then there's horizontal or lateral communication. Our downward communication, this is where communication of information flows from superiors to subordinates. So we just looked at formal communication. So there's a direct link between these two types of communications. All right. So where communication flows downward from superiors to subordinate, as we said, it's often directive in nature, requiring the receivers of the information, that is a subordinate, it requires some action from them. Then we have upward communication. Communication flows from the subordinate to the superiors. So remember, we in a previous slide, we talked about the importance of feedback. So this may include or take the form of, for example, reports, if they're incident reports that may take place in an organization. Oftentimes we may have opportunities or platform as employees to give suggestions, provide proposals, and also there should be a platform or something in place, some mechanism in place to provide information for employee grievances to be documented and to be directed to the information of superiors and managers. All right, so upward communication. Then we also have horizontal or lateral communication. This is communication among subordinates at the same level. For example, you may find functional managers from different departments within the same organization may need to meet, right? And then finally, we have diagonal communication. What is diagonal communication? This is communication between people who are neither in the same department nor at the same level in the organizational hierarchy. For example, let's take yourself as a student. So a student from the environmental studies department, you may need to communicate with the registrar, the head of the registry department. Maybe you may need the registrar's sign off on something in order to register for a course. So in that context, that is an example of diagonal communication. Then we have organizational communication that is based on expression. It may be oral or verbal, or it may be written. So oral or verbal is communication made direct face-to-face or through telephone or intercom system. Or now we have virtual conferences where we can have video conferencing. This often saves time and money on the spot clarification and may be more effective. However, a major drawback here is the fact that there's no permanent record. So if there's nothing in writing and there's no permanent record, at a later date, you may find persons may have forgotten some of the issues and decisions that had been made, and there is no opportunity to for a paper trail in order to refer back for guidance. However, another advantage now in this digital and virtual workspace age is that even if we have these opportunities for virtual face-to-face, we now have the advantage of being able to record meetings, video recording and audio recording. Now, written communication, this includes statements, circulars, letters, reports, memos, manuals, etc. So these are all various forms and certainly not limited to various forms of written communication. These provide permanent records and can be referred to when necessary. So if you can't recollect something, you can't recall a decision that was made on a particular issue, a particular time, you can refer back to it. It provides good lengthy communication and reduces the chance of missing important bits of information. However, it can be time consuming and the opportunity for an on-spot clarification is not available. All right, so each has its advantage and disadvantages. Let's talk about technology and organizational communication now. So technology is used by organizations to establish communication patterns and systems that facilitate the flow of information across organizations. So some of the more traditional technologies that we would have been familiar with for decades would be email, teleconferences. Now we have virtual conferences, video conferencing. All of these make organizational communication much easier and much accessible, more accessible. These methods of electronic communication, they can help make distance a non-factor in organizational communication. For example, you can be at home across a country or across various countries, and you can have your meetings. In your case, you guys are students, you have the opportunity to sit in the comfort of your home. You don't have to commute to Costart City campus or whichever campus in order to attend your classes. Communication technology lets your manager better collect data around the workplace, allowing them to make more informed decisions that can be data driven. So to give you another example, you can electronically send out employee surveys via the internet, SurveyMonkey, etc., and collect feedback information from employees in order to improve your decision-making capacity. Technology allows managers to obtain constructive criticism from your complaints and to make changes in order to improve the workplace. All right, so that point and the previous are somewhat related. Okay, so you're not just, so the manager doesn't just want to collect data, but they want to collect constructive criticism. For example, if you as an employee, you are experiencing having to implement a particular workflow or way of completing a task, and in your experience, it doesn't work well that way, and there may be a better way of doing it, there should be an opportunity and a platform for you to provide that recommendation for improvement to your managers. Last point. One drawback is that increased accessibility of organizational communication can complicate the boundaries between your work life and home life. And most of us are experiencing that now, whether it is related to school or whether it's related to work. You find oftentimes now that there seems to be no cutoff in terms of when your workday ends. No defined lunch hour where you get to, relax, recuperate, clear your brain from all the clutter in order to resume working again. Okay, so there are some challenges there with regards to this, the use of technology in the workplace. Let's look now at human relationships in the workplace. So human relations-centric approach to management and business requires special skill sets by the supervisors, employers, and managers. Okay, there are different things that they need to be equipped with. Let's look first at communication. So effective communication helps ensure that all employees not only are on the same page, but also feel motivated and valued in their work. All right, so it's not just about information, but you need to ensure that your communication brings some level of comfort and confidence to your employees. This is achieved through effective communication of important information to employees. Number 2, conflict resolution. So the managers or employers, they must be able to carry out effective communication. They must be able to manage conflicts. So managing individuals with different personality types, different worldviews. We would have in previous courses talked about worldviews. So your worldview is how, various things, your life experiences, your socialization, your friends, your religion, how all of these things can shape your worldview and cause you to make decisions or influence you in terms of the way you interpret everything around you, right? So all of these varying things, personality types, worldviews, and your personal goals, this can make universal agreement on anything incredibly difficult, right? So managers must be able to help the team work together in a civil manner. So you don't all have the same priorities. You don't agree on all the same things, but there should be some point of agreement. And in order to assist in overcoming these conflicts or these points of disagreement, you may find that it might be useful in focusing on the areas that you do agree on. And it's important that you agree on the important goals, that is in terms of getting the job done. All right. So this is to ensure that the work gets done in a timely manner. So this is conflict resolution skills are important for the manager. The manager must also be able to multitask. So managers face countless tasks every day, questions and issues that they have to resolve on a daily basis. A good leader must be able to manage all these tasks, often competing priorities. So in other words, everything important. It's hard for you to rank and make a determination and say this is more important than the other. And you must be able to do that without missing the deadlines, because remember, productivity is important. So in order to do that, managers must be flexible. You may have a work plan, but you may find as you go along during the course of the week, you may have to make adjustments here and there in order to meet your final goals. Managers must also have negotiating skills, right? This is important, and this is key to keeping the peace between parties while reaching agreements where all parties are satisfied. So as I just mentioned a short while ago, where you have situations of disagreement within a team, a work team, those disagreements may arise as a result of different priorities, different views on things, it's important to find that point of agreement and to focus on that point of agreement in order to bring satisfaction to all the parties involved, in order that the work can be done and be achieved to satisfaction. Managers must be organized. So managers must be organized, as this is important in order to facilitate efficient workflows and to manage time appropriately, not only for themselves, but also for the employees, such as meeting deadlines. So managers will, not only lay out the tasks and recommend workflows, but managers will have to be monitoring the progress in terms of the ability to meet deadlines. So now we want to look at barriers to communication. There's several things that can cause barriers or hindrances to effective communication. And the first we would look at would be filtering. So this is filtering of information. What is filtering of information? This is a distortion or withholding of information to manage a person's reactions. So oftentimes we may find ourselves doing this deliberately. However, there are problems associated with that. Filtering information prevents members of an organization from getting a complete picture of the way things are. When there is that absence of complete understanding of the way things are, that can, as we would have mentioned before, that can lead to misunderstanding, that can lead to resistance in cooperation, etc. So to maximize effective communication, it is helpful to deliver a message in multiple ways and to seek information from multiple sources. So in this way, the effect of one person's filtering of the message will be diminished. Now, this is an important and key point here for all of us, not only within the organization, but in life in general, because we have so many things going on in the world around us right now that can affect us, whether you're talking about public health issues, whether you're talking about national disasters. It is important for you to get your information not only from multiple sources, but from multiple reliable sources, because information coming from any source will be filtered, be it social media, be it the traditional news media houses. I'm sure by now if you all pay attention to the news, you recognize that we live in a time now where even news media houses, which in times gone by you may have considered reliable sources of information, are not always reliable. They too, you find, will be filtering their information as well. So this is an important and key point here for us to understand, not only for our studies, but for life. Another point, selective perception. So this is also filtering, and we are filtering what we can see or hear to suit our own needs. However, oftentimes we find this may be unconscious. All right, so the first type of filtering we talked about may be deliberate, and the second type of filtering may be unconscious. So selective perception oftentimes is a time saver and a necessary tool in complex environments, which can isolate only information we need at that particular point in time. However, we can run into problems in the sense that by filtering out information that we consider priority or important at this point in time, we may have missed other essential information, causing us to make mistakes as we go further along. For example, if you find in your student email or your work email that you've received 20 or 25 messages all in 1 hour, you may find yourself instinctively filtering out those information by looking at the email subject titles to make a determination. Okay, what is priority? What do I need to look at first? And as a result, you may find that you may have missed something important. Other barriers include information overload. So information overload is defined as occurring when information processing demands on the individual's time to perform interactions and internal calculations exceeds the amount of time that you have to actually process the information. Let's go back to the example I just gave. You have certain tasks that you have to complete at work, and you find that 25 emails came in. It's hard for you to be able to process all of that. It's impossible for you to be able to process all of that before the end of the workday. So you will find yourself carrying out selective perception, making a determination as to what is priority. All right. So this information overload, unfortunately, is a symptom of the technology or the information age that we live in. That is where information is bombarding us from every direction through the internet, social media, and other forms of digital media. And what we find is that this is going to affect us. This affects us mentally. Information overload, according to Overholt, leads to significant negative effect on efficiency, creativity, and mental acuity. It affects you. It stresses you out. And as you get stressed out, you are less able to efficiently and effectively carry out the tasks that you need to complete at any particular time. All right. Another barrier would be emotional disconnects. This can happen when the receiver or the sender is upset about a particular subject at hand, or maybe it might be some unrelated incident. Maybe you might have had a problem at home. You and your family might have had a quarrel, and you go to work upset, or you go into a work setting or environment upset. It can actually affect your productivity. It can affect your ability to communicate or your ability to receive information that is communicated to you, and therefore it will affect your productivity. Right? So as the note says here, one or both parties may have to put their emotions aside in order to achieve the goal of communicating clearly. So in a situation like that, a certain level of maturity is expected of not only one, but should be expected of both parties. Another barrier, lack of source credibility. So many things can compromise the credibility of a source of the information. The person's personality, the person giving the information, receivers of the information may find that the person's personality is not one that they are comfortable with, or maybe even on the receiver end, the receiver receives the information in a way that is not helpful, not positive or productive. Also, unfamiliarity with the sender of the information. On the receiving end, you may find yourself thinking, okay, I don't know this person. What is this person's, how should I say, what is this person's credibility in terms of their knowledge and expertise to give me this information? So you might find yourself asking questions like that. Maybe you may know the individual giving the information, and as a receiver, you may say, well, I don't trust this person. I have had experience with them, right? So all these things can contribute to a feeling that the source of the information may not be credible. Gossip is also a challenge to information credibility. This facilitates self-promoting communication, and also the information will not be reliable. The source of the information will not be clear. So that affects the credibility of the information as well on the part of the receivers. So this concern of credibility of the source of information, this is a challenge that managers must counter very quickly, and do so through official channels. So if, let's say, for example, gossip is spreading in the organization and somebody comes and tells you, okay, I hear the senior manager just got fired and they're hiring a new person. And then, this leads to the receivers of the information getting concerned, all right, a new person is coming in so quickly, things will change, the way in which we do things, and they start to get stressed out. It's important for managers to act quickly to ensure that correct information is put out there through official channels to stem the tide of that incorrect and unreliable information going out there. Next, we look at semantics, barriers to communication. So this is the study of the meaning in communication. Words can mean different things to different people. So it's about language. So organizational or technical jargon may be unfamiliar to some of your receivers of the information. So key here is to ensure that you know who your audience is and tailor your language, your communication language to their level of understanding. So you do not want to be using jargon that could be unfamiliar to your receivers. Next, we have gender differences that can pose barriers to communication. So men and women have different communication styles, which may work against them. For example, it is known that women like to ask questions before starting a project, while men, on the other hand, tend to be ready to just jump right in. An insensitive manager may not understand these different natures between men and women, and they might perceive the responses of both parties differently. For example, a male manager who's unaware of how women communicate, their readiness to work may perceive the women and they're asking questions as a lack of readiness or a lack of confidence in doing the job. Whereas a man would be ready to jump in with less information, but have to be getting the information as they go along. All right. Whereas women tend to want the information up front. So keep in mind that men tend to focus more on competition, data, and orders in their communication strategies, while women tend to focus more on cooperation and teamwork, intuition, how they feel and what they think is right. And quite frankly, women tend to be very good at that. I think it's innate in women's nature. And also in terms of requests rather than orders. So the styles are very different, but each style can be effective in the right situation. Okay. Another barrier could be poor listening, or rather, let's look at poor listening versus active listening. So poor listening can be a barrier to communication. So what does this mean? Poor and active listening. So a good manager needs to listen as much as he needs to talk. So the receiver's ability to listen effectively is equally vital to communication. So both parties need to be listening and speaking as well for effective communication to take place. So listening doesn't always lead to understanding. Poor listening leads to lower productivity and morale. For example, employees feel that their managers are not listening to them. So note what we said, listening doesn't always lead to understanding. So inherent in that is poor listening skills. All right. If you have active listening on the other hand, where we say a person gives their full attention to what the other person is saying, understanding should come out of that. And you may find that active listening may be accompanied by asking questions and also not interrupting at inappropriate times. Okay, so active listening is not passive. Active listening involves participation in the process of listening and understanding. So active listening increases the flow of information as well as the accuracy of the information from one party to the other. So in order for effective communication to take place, active listening is important. So in summary, no one lives or functions in isolation in this world. So in an organizational setting, we work together to meet the organizational vision and goals of the company or the organization. Therefore, effective communication is vital to the organizational survival in a very complex world, and one that is getting increasingly complex. So communication has become more and more important because we have so many different means of communication, so many different sources of communication. We need to be able to identify where these credible sources of information come from, where there are challenges and problems to communication, and how to effectively and quickly redirect and correct communication challenges in order to meet our goals. So for today's lesson, guys, I would like to redirect you to eClassroom. There would be additional reading available for you in the Unit 2 resources. Most of those resources will be directly connected to what we have discussed in the lecture today. So additional reading and more detailed information will be available to you there. You are also asked to complete the activity. There is a discussion forum to provide some reinforcement of the lesson today. Video case, a very short video case is presented for you that looks at an example of communication failure. You're asked to read the question that is posed in the discussion forum carefully and refer back to the unit resources to provide some background information that you can provide a well thought out response. A rubric is provided for you on the lesson as well. Please be sure to use the rubric to guide your development of your post. Okay, so thank you for joining me for today's lesson, and I will see you online.